Welcome back. So, we are going to finish our talk on chapter 2 of my book on connection. Again, the title of my book is Aim to Be Human. It is available on my website, which I'll leave a link down below in the description of this video. And let's pick back up where we left off. So, in the first video on connection, we spoke about how babies are they have an automatic connection with the mother when they're born because they are connected by the umbilical cord, and they also live inside of the mother. So that kind of creates a automatic connection. And then once they're born, if the mother chooses to breastfeed, that's also another automatic form of connection. And also fathers, if they choose to do bottle feedings, the father can use that as an opportunity to build intentional bonding and connection with the baby as well. We also spoke about sensors. You call them senses, I call them sensors. Your sense of sight, smell, taste, your ability to hear, touch with your skin, and feel with your nervous system. We also spoke about how important it is for parents to understand that babies are born with all of the feelings and emotions and no ability to communicate verbally. They have the ability to cry when their needs, when they have needs that need to be met, but they don't have the ability to verbally articulate anything. And as they get older into the infant toddler stage of life, they are learning how to crawl and walk and say their first words and developing full sentences. And this is the time frame where parents usually begin to discount feelings and emotions because they tend to think that feelings and emotions are replaced by verbal communication. There's this sense of they can talk now, so let's cut out all this crying and whining. Like, just say what you want or say what you need and let's stop all this crying. And as a parent, I need you to understand that when your children learn how to verbally communicate, this is the time to merge. They are to merge together. Feelings and emotions, along with verbal communication, they are to merge together. They are intermingled, intertangled, and your children need you to help them to develop emotional language, skills, and tools. Emotional language is like any other language. It's just like Spanish, English, French. You have to model it for your children to learn how to incorporate it into their own lives and how to express it in a healthy way. It's not something that children just learn because they exist. They need you to model it for them so they can perceive it and then start to kind of mirror it, model it back to you. So we are going to talk about how important it is that you as a parent align your communication. This is another form of connection. When your verbal communication is not in alignment with your nonverbal communication, that breaks trust. And broken trust breaks connection. You can think of any relationship that you've got in your adult life where if somebody says one thing and their body language doesn't match, it automatically creates a level of distrust. It doesn't matter who it is. If they tell you that they are, I don't know, a mechanic and something doesn't look right about what it is that they're doing, it creates a level of distrust. Like the language and the nonverbal communication, the verbal language and the nonverbal communication, they have to be in alignment to create that trust that builds a solid connection that you can continue laying bricks on to build a healthier and stronger connection. However, when parents are not able to understand that verbal communication doesn't replace the emotional communication, this is usually where the wedges get formed in their connection. And this usually happens because parents didn't get their emotional needs met in their childhood. And if you go back and look at your parents' childhood, you'll realize they didn't get theirs met either. You go back to your grandparents, you'll realize they didn't get theirs met either. There's a pattern that you'll notice. And I say this because I noticed this same pattern in my own life. Excuse me. After I realized that my emotional needs weren't met in my childhood, I became very frustrated and irritated and bothered. And I was just trying to figure out, like, why, like, how, like, why didn't this happen for me? And then I got to a stage where I started looking at my parents' childhood, and I realized that they didn't get their emotional needs met in their childhood either. And then I started looking at my grandparents, and I realized they didn't get their emotional needs met either. And I know my great-grandparents and everybody else, they didn't get theirs met either, because that's how the pattern is existing. But as I kept going back one generation after the next, it took me to a place in time where I realized that, oh, they were living in a world that was drastically different. They were born into and raised in a world where being a sharecropper was a thing. They were born into and raised into a world where Jim Crow was a real thing. They were born into and raised in a world where, like, my grandfather fought in World War II. It's a tongue twister. But they were born into and raised in a world that was drastically different. They were being exposed to racism on a much different scale than what we are today. It is still bad today, but they were dealing with it in a much more bolder, in your face way than what it is today. And not to go too far off into left field talking about that, but if you do the same thing in your family, you will realize that there are some experiences, some ways of the world in which your parents were born into that were beyond their control, some things that they experienced that they had to adapt in order to survive. It wasn't an option of, do you want to do this or do that? It was, they had to do this in order to survive. And as I kept going back and looking at these generations, I realized that disconnecting from their feelings and emotions wasn't something that they chose to do because they had options. They chose to do it because it was necessary. It was a requirement in order to survive, not to thrive. It was necessary to live another day, to prevent being brutalized, to prevent being just treated in very inhumane ways. And when you are forced to be in an environment like that, it disconnects you from yourself. It disconnects you from your ability to engage with your feelings and emotions in a healthy way. As a human being, it is imperative, it is necessary that you are able to be in healthy relationship with your feelings and emotions. This is a part of healthy connection. You must have emotional integrity. That's another chapter in my book that we'll talk about later, but emotional integrity is your ability as a human being to be honest about what you're feeling on the inside and be honest about why you're feeling it. And so many of us are not able to be honest about what we're feeling on the inside and why we're feeling it, because as children, we were left to make sense of experiences that we had no business trying to process on our own. And it's not because your parents were bad, it's because your parents didn't know how to help you process these things. And they didn't know how to help you do it, again, because nobody did it for them. And if you keep going back, like I just mentioned, you'll realize that there is a pattern of emotional needs not being met. And if you want to break this pattern of dysfunctional behavior, beliefs, mindsets in your family, you must step up and be the first one to question, to challenge, to examine the poor behaviors that you have inherited so that you can make changes to the way you respond to things that create emotional discomfort for you, so that you can rewire the way you respond to things. So, well, not respond, but you're probably reacting to things, so that you can change from being reactive to responding. It is necessary. So, children, little children, they really need help discerning fantasy from reality, real from fake, right from wrong. An example that I often use is children being afraid of the dark. And this is one that's actually true for me. As a child, I was afraid of the dark. And I recall one particular incident where I stayed up a little bit later than I should have. And I watched, I don't know if it was Freddy or Jason, but either way, I probably had no business watching either one of those movies, because when it was over and I went to my room to go to bed, I don't know what had happened, but somehow, some way, the clothing and the shoes, whatever was on the floor, the door was cracked just right, the lighting from the hallway, it created this shadow on the wall that you couldn't tell me it wasn't Freddy or Jason coming to get me. It wasn't moving, but as a kid, I didn't have the ability to discern fantasy from reality, real from fake, right from wrong. Like, I literally thought somebody was coming to get me. And children need adults to help them make sense of things like that. Otherwise, they start perceiving and believing that they are the threat, that they are the problem, that they are the issue, that they need to change things about themselves in order for things to be okay. I used to be afraid of thunder and lightning. My goodness. I remember when we bought our first and only house in my childhood. I was like maybe 2 or 3 weeks before I turned 9. I recall several incidents in this house where it would be thunder and lightning outside. And it was so intense. I'm talking about like that thunder and lightning where you see the lightning bolt coming down from the sky. Like you can feel it vibrating the windows in the house. Like you couldn't tell me like the world wasn't coming to an end. Like I thought the world was coming to an end. And I just wanted to be around another adult, another person, because I didn't want to be alone. And I was so afraid, but I didn't have the emotional language or skills to like say I'm afraid of the thunder and lightning. I just found somebody I could be around because I didn't want to be by myself. But it's important that you help your children learn how to express their feelings and emotions so that they can verbally articulate what's happening on the inside of them and get their needs met in a healthy way. And again, as a parent, if you didn't get your needs met in a healthy way in your childhood, if you were exposed to environments where you were being lied to, manipulated, betrayed, gaslit, smear campaigns, abuse of any kind, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. Maybe you saw financial abuse between your parents, or maybe it was SA abuse. All of those are experiences that require parental guidance for a child to be able to navigate it well. And it must stop so that the child can feel safe. Like if it happens once and they're able to receive some type of guidance from a parent, the repair process can happen. But if it's something that's ongoing, again, it creates a state of conflict because the verbal communication and the nonverbal are not in alignment, which means that the trusted bond, it's not there, which is creating a wedge, a gap in the connection between the parent and the child. So it's important that if you experience things in your childhood that were traumatic, that felt emotionally unsafe, that required you to adapt in unhealthy ways just to survive, you really need to go and get therapy. You really need to go and find a licensed, qualified therapist to help you sort through and process those experiences so that you can get the necessary healing to support your children as they continue to grow, mature, and develop throughout the remainder of their childhood. And this is going to be your greatest opportunity to prevent passing that trauma onto your own children by creating emotionally healthy connections with your children. Your children need you to heal so that they can be okay. Emotional language, it is just like any other language. It is just like Spanish, French, English. It is a language that must be taught and learned so that they can express and articulate themselves in a healthy way about what is happening on the inside of them. We all have an internal world of feelings and emotions, and we need a responsible, mature, emotionally and mentally mature adult, a parent, preferably a parent, to help us understand what is happening on the inside of us. When you leave children alone to make sense of big feelings and emotions, they are naturally going to lean towards false and fake realities and what's wrong instead of what's right, because they don't have the maturity to choose what is best. They're going to naturally lean towards what feels good based on their current level of mental and emotional maturity. And if you think about it, like a 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 10-year-old, they don't have the mental and emotional maturity to make wise decisions, especially when they're being faced with adult-like circumstances and they are being left to navigate them on their own. And when you leave children to make sense of these type of things by themselves, this is where the adaptation process of losing your authenticity starts, and they start to sacrifice their authentic self, and they become more performative to maintain that connection with their parent. Meaning they will, if you have a tendency to scream and yell, when they make a mess, they start learning to kind of become more perfectionist. Like, oh, I can't do this, I can't do that because mommy or daddy's going to scream and yell. And they don't want you to scream and yell. They also don't even understand why you're screaming and yelling. They just know that it feels unsafe. Going back to that primary language of feelings and emotions that every human being is born with. They don't have the ability to understand that you're just frustrated and it has nothing to do with them. In their minds, you are screaming and yelling. It feels unsafe. It feels dangerous. They don't like it and they don't want it to happen again. So they are going to do whatever is necessary, whatever they are capable of doing to make sure they don't have that experience again, especially if it's something that is like ongoing consistently. It happens like every day or every week. They are going to learn how to adapt to this situation in whatever capacity they can to feel emotionally safe. And this is where a lot of children start learning that they can, they're not learning it on a conscious level, but this is where their intelligence, their human intelligence, their authentic intelligence, that's what I call it in my book. A lot of us are learning about artificial intelligence, and artificial intelligence is cool. It's definitely got a purpose, but we really need to focus on learning what our authentic intelligence is capable of, and understanding why we are doing and saying and behaving in some of the ways that we are behaving, so that we can start to untangle ourselves from these unhealthy behaviors that are not serving us well, that keep this trauma passing from one generation to the next. we've got to really start spending time with ourselves to understand what is going on and why. And let's see. It's just really important as a parent that you take the time necessary to do your healing work so that you can minimize and prevent the trauma that you'll pass on to your children. It is not to say that you have to be perfect, because you're human, I'm human, your children are human. We are all going to make mistakes. And when you make mistakes, it is important that you take responsibility, take accountability, regardless of what it is that you said or did. As soon as you have an awareness that, I shouldn't have said that, I shouldn't have did that, I was wrong for that, go to your child and apologize and explain to them why you're apologizing. Model this good behavior for your children so that they can learn how to do it when they become adults and decide to have children of their own. This is how you break the cycle, by learning the skills that allows you to engage with your children, especially when you are having big emotional experiences on the inside as an adult that you don't fully understand yet, but it's leading you to have reactive behavior, poor behavior, because of the adaptive skills that you learned in your childhood, that it happened so long ago before your earliest memory, it seems like it's normal. And because everybody else in the environment was behaving in a similar way, again, it seems normal. And this is all you may seem to know. So therefore, it really seems normal. It's like, you'll hear people say it all the time, like, that's just the way I am. I'm like that with everybody. That doesn't make it right. I had somebody tell me that not too long ago when I confronted them with how their poor behavior was impacting me. And they literally told me that this is who I am. This is the way I am. I'm like this with everybody, as if treating everybody poorly makes your poor behavior more acceptable to me. If you treat everybody like that, you should really go and sit with yourself and understand why you're doing it, so that you can heal whatever unmet needs and wounds that you have, so that you can show up better, show up in a healthier way in every relationship that you have: parent, child, husband, wife, brother, sister, whatever it is. It's important that we do the healing work necessary so that we can show up as the healthiest and best versions of ourselves in our relationships. So I think this is going to be the last video on Chapter 2, Connection. The next video for my book will be on Chapter 3. And Chapter 3 is titled Authentic Intelligence. And in this chapter, I'm talking about how important it is that you develop and learn to understand your AI, your authentic intelligence, because the world has evolved so much with this artificial intelligence and other things. You must get in healthy relationship with your authentic intelligence, because AI is doing a lot of things that requires you as a human being and your children and every generation that comes after them, because artificial intelligence is going nowhere. It is here to stay. But you must learn to understand and train your children to understand their AI, their authentic intelligence, so that they can discern well in this world that is being filled with things that are not real. On top of the people in the world that are dysfunctional, now you've got to learn how to navigate the ways that people are now going to increase their ability to scam and scheme and deceive you, as well as dealing with human beings that are sometimes going to be doing the same thing. And this is not to say that everybody's going to do it, but you need these skills to navigate this world well. So thank you for tuning in, and I will see you in the next video.